the radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Yaron Brook Show on this Sunday afternoon. Beautiful Sunday afternoon today in Southern California. It hasn't been that nice last few days, but it's a gorgeous day right now. Maybe a little cold for us, for those of us used to living on the Caribbean islands where it never gets over 70 degrees. All right, today we're going to talk vaccines. We're going to talk quite a bit about vaccines. Also, of course, taking your Super Chat questions and so on. So I was wondering this morning, kind of what should I talk about today? And Kyle has already picked up on this. I'm wondering what I should talk about today. And, all the topics that I'm reading in the news, I can't get excited about. So there's the rally, the rally for Trump yesterday in D.C., which I probably should talk about. But I'm tired of it. I'm tired of talking about Trump and tired of talking about the trends. And I'm tired of being right about these things all the time. I mean, I saw a clip of Nick Fuentes, the anti-Semitic, racist, alt-right guy, speaking at that rally. And that was enough to suggest that, unfortunately, these elements are more and more taking over the Republican Party. And it wasn't just Nick Fuentes. I mean, if you looked at the string of speakers there were a lot of evangelical preachers, a lot of people talking about God and religion and a calling, and Trump is their idol, maybe, and how this is God's work to fight against the Biden and to fight against the stealing of the election, and religious terminology in the most scary sense. David French has a piece on it today about, and he's quite religious, he's an evangelical, but about the number of evangelical Christians who have turned, who have treating Trump as if he's a golden idol or a messenger from God or a Messiah, and it's scary. This is, again, what I've predicted for a long time, the elevation of religion, the elevation of nationalism, the elevation of the alt-right, the mainstreaming of the alt-right. I said that in 2015, 2016, when the alt-right, 2016 really, when the alt-right was really starting to become a force. It looked like it was going to infiltrate the right and become a real force within the right, and it has. It's been mainstreamed. It doesn't call itself an alt-right anymore. It doesn't need to, because it's been mainstreamed. So I didn't want to talk about that, so I'm not going to talk about that. There were some stories about Biden's immigration plans, and they're not pleasing the progressives. They're not pleasing the progressives. All right. I'm not surprised, as I said. Biden's not going to please the progressives very much with most of what he does. So I went then to one of the websites I always go to when I'm not sure what I want to talk about. And as always, I went to John Cochran's website. I went to the grumpyeconomist.com, I highly recommend John's blog, one of the best blogs on economics and just anything that touches economics, culturally, politically. And John is always insightful, always interesting, even when you disagree with him. You have to marvel at his ability to reason and to think and to present evidence. So I went to his blog and I found two fabulous articles to talk about. And so I initially wanted to talk about both, and then I decided I'll postpone one and just talk about one of the articles he wrote because it's excellent. It's a point I'm pissed off at myself because I should have thought of. It's a topic for a show I should have had already because it hits on everything that is fitted to the Yaron Brook Show. It's about economics, it's about morality, it's about ethics, it's about politics. It's about what a world would look like if there was a free market. It's just perfect. So I want to talk about free market vaccines, free market vaccination. And again, all credit goes to John Cochrane for bringing this up and for writing out his ideas, and I'll basically be summarizing what John has written and what some others. I've got a couple of other. Tyler Cowen wrote something which I don't think is very good about this, and then I found a working paper, a paper that somebody wrote about vaccines that I also found interesting. So we're going to talk about how would vaccination work in a free market, and what should be done even today. Note that there is one thing that nobody seems to question, that there's just no discussion about. And John actually makes this point in his article, and he's kind of shocked, and he says, not a single libertarian is making this point. What's going on out there? What's going on with the libertarians? Is there no courage? Is there no, what has happened to them? He says, quote, that nobody dares say this publicly. Not even my favorite libertarians that I have seen, he says, is a little surprising. What happened to America and to economics? That absolutely nobody seems to even question the holy writ that drug companies shall only sell to governments. Governments shall allocate vaccines, and severe legal penalties shall accrue to anyone who doesn't like it, unquote. That is the shocking reality we live in. Only governments can buy the vaccines. Only governments can allocate the vaccines. And only governments can tell private entities like CVS or Walgreens, who are basically acting here as government agents, who to give the vaccines to. If I want to contract with my local CVS to buy a vaccine, I can't. Only the government can allocate vaccines. It's truly stunning that not a single voice, nobody, including, by the way, the great defender of the free market, Donald Trump, not a single voice is arguing to let the market be, to let drug companies decide how to allocate the vaccine, to let drug companies indeed profit maximize in allocating the vaccine. Now, maybe they've already profit maximized because they've charged so much to governments that, that is their profit maximizing strategy. I don't know. I haven't run the economics of it. I haven't run the math on it. But imagine a world, a free market world or a semi-free market world in which the drug companies got to decide how to allocate the vaccine, who to sell it to. Now, it could be that some buyers, maybe it's CVS, maybe it's Walgreens, maybe it's insurance companies, maybe it's hospitals, pre-order some amount of vaccine at a market-driven price. Maybe drug companies auction off the vaccine to the highest bidder. Maybe CVS and Walgreens buy the drug and then they auction off to the highest bidder. Or maybe they don't auction it off. Maybe they set an initial very, very high price when there's limited supply, and then start decreasing the price, over time as more and more, basically supply and demand matching up, as more and more vaccines come online, decreasing the price, and therefore making it available to more and more people. Yes, Ian says, Tyler Cowen has actually made the point the government pre-bought things will actually slow down manufacturer release. That's right, because you're not letting the price mechanism, you're not letting price signals, you're not letting market signals of supply and demand dictate the allocation. So, but you can imagine, it would slow it down, but you could imagine that if governments overpaid dramatically for the vaccines, much more than, let's say, the market would have, that the drug companies could theoretically make a lot more money from pre-selling it to governments. I don't know if they have, but they could. Whereas on a market, they'd have to sell at the market price. Of course, if they were first to market, they would have be able to price it very, very high. And if they auctioned it, they would price it very, very high for some people and not for others. So how exactly a drug company would allocate the vaccine, I think would be interesting. But you'd have to take away all the laws that restrict things like, charging different people different prices. You'd have to take all the laws about, what do you call it, in times of shortages when prices go up. You'd have to take all the laws away that prohibit that kind of behavior. You would actually have to let the market price these. Make the market actually free. And nobody's suggesting this. Even Tyler Cowen in his piece about allocation of drugs, vaccines, it takes for granted that the government is going to do it. And then the argument is, how should the government do it? What's the most optimal way to allocate the vaccine, given that it's the government doing? And you can do that, but it would be nice if more of us stood up, as John Cochrane has, and made the argument that the government shouldn't be involved at all. I mean, there's a big debate about, are we going to make vaccinations mandatory? Well, of course not. But it's worse than that. It's not the government's job to decide who should get it first. I'll give you a quick example. Right now, the first vaccine has been given in the UK to a 90-year-old woman. A 90-year-old woman is probably doing fine isolating herself, protecting herself by not interacting with other people. A 90-year-old woman is probably not a super spreader. She's probably not going out and partying all night. She's probably not going to bars and restaurants and music concerts and sporting events and therefore spreading it widely. She's probably sitting at home or in a nursing home and having limited contact with limited number of people who could all be tested, and therefore she would be fine. How does it make sense to give it to a 90-year-old when there's a shortage and when people are actually dying of COVID? How does it make sense to give it to a 90-year-old who's probably going to die in the next, let's say, 5 years? Probability is very high. 10 years, probability almost 100%. What kind of thinking, other than altruism, drives a policy that gives it to the most vulnerable rather than giving it to the ones who would benefit the most from the vaccine? Now, how do you know who will benefit the most from the vaccine? Well, one way to do that is to have people bid on the vaccine. If it's in limited supply, the people who pay the most for the vaccine are the ones most likely to benefit the most from getting it. And who would those be, for the most part? I mean, there would be people who, in order to create wealth, in order to work, in order to go out there and engage in economic activity, need a vaccination so they can go out and work and, again, travel and do the things necessary. It could be that airlines have this massive incentive to buy huge quantities of vaccine and provide it, let's say even free of charge, to their frequent flyers. American Airlines, it didn't make a fraction of what they made in 2019 on me in 2020. But imagine if American Airlines said, we need to get a vaccine to Iran so he can start flying again, because if he starts flying again, we make money. Hospitals. I mean, instead of the government decided that first responders need it, I don't know what the mortality rate is among first responders. I don't know how many first responders land up in hospital. But if so, then hospitals would be bidding for vaccines, bidding high for the vaccines. And of course, here you'd have to assume that they were being paid, so they were on a for-profit basis. But because of the damage that the virus might be doing to their staff, to their doctors, who then can't work, who can't do procedures, and as a consequence of can't doing procedures, the hospital can't make money, they would want to buy vaccines. And who would they vaccinate first? like Stanford. John Cochran has the story about Stanford. So Stanford is getting some vaccines. Stanford is a hospital, and Stanford has decided it's going to allocate the vaccines first to its hospital, right? So let me just see. Okay, so Stanford's decided it's going to be to its healthcare, right? Okay, so they said, so let's assume that if Stanford as a university had bid for this vaccine, they still would have probably allocated it first to healthcare. That's its highest and best use, let's assume. But now, within the healthcare system, who should get it? Who should get it first? Should it be the doctors? Because there's limited supply, even then. Should it be the doctors? Or should it be the custodial workers? They're all exposed to the vaccine. So you've got a whole group of superstar, I'm sure, medical ethicists at Stanford University, one of the best places in the world, best universities in the world, thinking and struggling and trying to figure out who should get the vaccine first. Doctors or custodial workers. And they couldn't come up with an answer. They can't, there's no algorithm, right? Because they're driven by altruism, and they've got a utilitarian system muted by egalitarianism. So if you just looked at it from a benefit analysis, you probably want to get the doctors first, because if the doctor gets sick, Stanford loses more money. If the doctor gets sick, he can't treat patients. And you probably want to get the COVID doctors first, and then, it's further away, but you want to get the doctors and nurses. I mean, based on how rare, how difficult it is to find that talent, that's who you want to vaccinate first. But that's not fair. Fair based on an egalitarian standard. So fair means, but what about the custodial workers? Well, custodial workers are replaceable. Custodial workers, if they get sick, do less damage to the institute than if a doctor gets sick. But those considerations would be selfish on the part of the hospital. So you can't have those kind of considerations. The consideration have to be egalitarianism, what they call fairness, which means equality. And therefore what we need is to treat everybody the same, but we can't. That doesn't make any sense either. So guess how Stanford is allocating the vaccine? Anybody have any idea how Stanford is allocating their vaccine? Stanford University. Randomly. They're doing it randomly. They're putting all the names into a random generating machine, and whoever's name comes out first will get it first, and then they'll go down a list, and it's random. God forbid, morality forbid, altruism forbid, egalitarianism forbid, that they make a decision based on their own self-interest, based on what would benefit their own institution. They can't just make it the poor or the custodials, because that is insane. That even they get that is insane, right? Some of the doctors need to get it at least. So it's completely random. Completely random. Now again, in a free market, Stanford could decide whatever it wanted to do in terms of how it wanted to allocate the vaccine that it bought. But in a rational world, Stanford would give the vaccine to the people most valuable to Stanford. This vaccine issue and the whole COVID issue from the beginning have been amazing ethical laboratories. Amazing to see how people have twisted and turned to ignore the self-evident. For example, God forbid we isolate the old and let the young live. That would be discriminatory. That would be non-egalitarian. So we sacrifice the young for the old, which we do all the time anyway, right? Social Security, Medicare, you can go on and on, right? We sacrifice the young to the old and lock down the young. And then destroy the economy. Now, who suffers the most when you destroy the economy? Well, it's the young, because they have a future. The old hopefully have saved money. They're already set. But it's the young. You've destroyed their economy for them. You've destroyed their lives for them because they're stuck at home. And for what? The virus is not dangerous for the young. The virus is not that big of a risk for the young. But that's what altruism, that's what egalitarianism, that's what, quote, fairness means. That's what it demands. That's what it necessitates. Let's be fair. Let's treat everybody the same, even if it means sacrificing some to others. Well, particularly if it means sacrificing some to others, because sacrifice is noble, sacrifice is good, sacrifice is indeed virtuous. Virtuous. So in a free market, drug companies would be profit maximizers. They would have contracts and they would try to sell the drug to the highest bidder. And the highest bidder would be those who thought they could generate the most benefit from the drug. It would mean that people engaged in economic activity, valuable, wealth-creating economic activity, would get the drug first. Now, not only would this be just and right because they're paying for it, and it's the drug companies to allocate any way they want, of course, but also it would actually be most economically efficient. And it would make sense most culturally. Young people don't have the option of locking themselves at home and not seeing anybody. Old people do. Because they don't have to work for a living, most of them. Because they've saved up, they're retired. They don't need to be out there engaging. And if they choose to do it, then they're taking on a risk for themselves. Young people don't have that luxury. They don't have that option of locking themselves away. They have to work for a living. They've got to live. They've got to save. They've got to take care of their kids. They've got to take care of their business that might be going under. They've got to be flying around. They've got to be taking meetings. They've got to be doing the things that they need to do in order to survive and grow and thrive. And therefore, they would be willing to pay more for the vaccine. They should get it first. And the consequence of that would be the economy would return to normal. Because again, remember, young people don't die from this, mostly, right? Now, if somebody had a pre-existing condition and was working and needed to go to work, they would have an even higher incentive than somebody who didn't have a pre-existing condition and therefore wasn't worried about getting the virus. So the people with pre-existing condition would pay more to get the vaccine sooner so that they could protect themselves and their families and go back to economic activity and go back to taking care of themselves and their families. Again, if you just use the principle of freedom, the principle of egoism, of people taking care of themselves, of people motivated by their own self-interest. But you can even think about it this way. I found this one fascinating. There's a paper here. Now, this paper assumes the government buys all the vaccines, but then how should it allocate it? It says the best way is that everybody bids on it, but you can bid for somebody else to get it. So like you can bid, you can decide I'm 20 years old, I'm young, I'm not worried about it. I'll bid for my grandmother to get it. And she can bid for herself to get it. And the people who have the most bids in their name, and that can come from anybody, anyway, will get the vaccine first, and you'd rank order them that way. Now again, I don't think this is what would happen in a free market exactly like this, but it indicates a direction of how a free market would work. So for example, he writes, a firm at the helm of a company town may subsidize the vaccination of its employees in order to accelerate herd immunity in the town and thereby avert a lockdown costly to the firm. So, companies around a city, around a town, would have an incentive to vaccinate at least their employees, maybe even more than that, so that life can go back to normal. Or another one, a susceptible individual for whom the vaccine is medically contradicted. That is, he can't take the vaccine because, the side effects could cause him harm, may subsidize the vaccination of his doorman and housekeeper so that they can help him survive his isolation because he can't take the vaccine. A health insurance company may subsidize the vaccination of the most vulnerable among the insured, elderly, obese, suffering from chronic condition, in order to avoid paying their hospitalization bills. An airline, this is where I get the airline idea, an airline or a coffee shop chain like Starbucks knows its loyal customers, its potential super spreaders, and may subsidize their vaccination in order to neutralize the threat they pose to other customers and with them to the business. I mean, once you let the market figure this out, once you let market forces work, once you let insurance companies, drug companies, corporations broadly, employers, employees, wealthy people, wealthy individuals, just people, work out their own incentives, work out their own risk parameters, work out how much money they're willing to spend on a vaccine. I mean, amazing things happen. And you don't need this central planners in charge deciding who's vulnerable, who's essential worker, who's the 90-year-old to first get the vaccine. Because what you're getting right now, if you wanted, for example, to limit the spread of coronavirus, let's say what you really were afraid of is overloading the hospitals, right? The hospital's overloaded. And you want to flatten the curve. Haven't we heard that one before, right? Wanted to flatten the curve. Then what would you do? Would you then vaccinate 90-year-olds first? Again, we're talking about first, right? No. Where would you do the vaccinations? If you wanted to flatten the hospital curve, if you wanted even to make sure the 90-year-olds didn't get it ultimately, who would you vaccinate first? You would vaccinate super spreaders, which means you would set up vaccination stations in bars, restaurants, airports, I don't know, wherever science is telling us that people, you would vaccinate people who don't wear masks first. And in terms of risk, yeah, you might vaccinate 50 and 60-year-olds first, not 90-year-olds, 50 and 60-year-olds first. But you probably wouldn't because, again, 50 and 60-year-olds are still working, they're still engaged, so they would be the highest value vaccinations because they're likely to land up in a hospital if they get it, or there's a higher probability. They're likely to get it because they're still engaged in life, they're still out there, right? They can't be easily isolated. They still need to work because they haven't retired yet. I mean, that's the ideal age group. It's not 90-year-olds. So it's truly stunning that we take for granted that the government is buying the vaccine. We take for granted that the most vulnerable get it first, and that there's silence, other than, I guess, John Cochrane, in terms of, no, there's a free market solution to this that's like 100 times better, except by every standard, except by the standard of sacrifice and altruism. And if we left it to private incentives, if we left it to private enterprise, then it would happen faster, it would happen the most efficiently, and it would happen in priority of value. So, free market vaccination, spread the word, because that's what is really needed. Not 90-year-olds getting vaccinated, but those who have the most to lose, those who are willing to pay the most. Let's see. Whoever generates the most economic benefit from the vaccine would pay the most for the vaccine. Just like whoever benefits from in a shortage of gasoline, whoever benefits the most from gas would pay the most. Yep. And think about if vaccine makers makes oodles and oodles and oodles of money off of this auction, then they would have huge incentives to develop vaccines. If we did away with all these status laws that restrict the ability of vaccine makers to make oodles and oodles and oodles of money, then we would get a lot more companies going into the vaccine business. If we did away with all the different laws that restrict the ability to price the vaccines the way they think it should be priced, we'd get a lot more companies incentivized to go into the vaccine business. We'll see in a minute that none of this should have ever happened. Lockdowns, destruction of business, destruction of economic activity, destruction of wealth is just absurd. One of the ways to fix the system, even though the government is distributing, is instead of for the government to actually distribute the vaccine, imagine if the government distributed options like a claim on a vaccine, so a piece of paper that says you can get a vaccine. And imagine if individuals then could sell that claim. But it's illegal today. It's illegal. If they could sell that claim, just like people hawking tickets is illegal, which is absurd, you would create a market for this, and you would again mimic, at least to some extent, what would happen in a free market. But private transactions in vaccines are banned. Literally right now, we live in a world in which vaccine producers can only sell to government. Jacob asks a good question. Should high-value, high-demand individuals have different prison terms or more house arrest due to this logic, or is law outside these considerations? Law is outside these considerations because law is not a voluntary, in this case, if you've committed a crime, that is, if you have violated somebody else's rights by committing fraud, stealing, committing physical violence against somebody, murdering somebody, then it's not, there is no market consideration here. There's no economics to explain it. The only consideration is justice. The only consideration here is a penalty, is you suffering the consequence of your action and taking you out of society so you can't do it again, and, more importantly, making you pay for what you actually did. My argument here about the vaccine, yes, there is an element of it's more efficient and it produces better results, but the fundamental is here, why can't a vaccine maker who made the vaccine, who owns the vaccine, why can't they decide how to distribute the vaccine? Why can't they decide how to charge prices? Vaccines are purely economic phenomena. They're a purely property rights phenomena. But once you violate somebody's rights, you are not in the realm of the voluntary. You are now in the realm of government retaliatory force. You're now in the realm of justice, which is a different realm. Legal justice, a different realm from the justice of the marketplace. Those are two different ideas. They're based on the same principles. But one is voluntary, essentially voluntary, and the other one is not, because you violated somebody else's rights. Ruth asks, who will lose out most in a free market? They are the answer to why we live in an altruistic world and a mixed economy. No, that's not true. We live in an altruistic world and a mixed economy because those are the ideas prevalent, not because of some incentive. People are not driven by incentives. For example, almost nobody is advocating for this auction system, even though almost everybody would benefit from it. And they still wouldn't. Even the wealthy, the most productive, who would bid up the price of these vaccines and gain them first, are not advocating for it because they hold an altruistic philosophy. Even though they would benefit, they are willing to sacrifice. So the idea that people are driven by economic incentives is, I've argued against for a long, long time. Who will lose out most in a free market? It's the lazy. It's the unvirtuous. And particularly if you include lose in terms of spiritual game, in terms of happiness, in terms of pride. The only people who lose, and they're already losers, but they become bigger losers, are the what I call the wife-beating drunks, the people who don't want to work, who have wasted their lives, who are intent on hurting other people or hurting themselves. They lose because there's nobody there. Nobody's going to help them. Nobody's going to help them. And of course, those who benefit from the existing system in terms of power. So our politicians, our political class, our intellectual class. But the reason we live in an altruistic world is because nobody questions altruism. Everybody has accepted altruism. Not because it's the economic incentive to accept altruism, but because it's the only moral ideal they can conceive of, they can think of. It's the dominant moral ideal because our philosophers and our preachers have taught us that. And almost nobody is brave enough or knowledgeable enough or consistent enough to challenge those things. All right, let's see. All right, that's that. Okay. So that's the first issue I want to talk about that John Cochrane talks about in his essay. And by the way, John says if there's anybody who's actually talking about this stuff, send him an email, let him know that there are people out there who are talking about what he wrote, or about the topic in this free market way. So if anybody, one of you wants to send John Cochrane a link to my podcast, I'd appreciate that, and let him know that I picked up on his thread, picked up on his challenge, and are talking about it. I mean, that is horrible enough and horrific enough because now we're going to see government completely, I mean, think about the 6 months before us where we're going to be locked down, restricted, where there are going to be no flights as normal. We're not going to be able to travel. We're not going to be able to do that when that is totally unnecessary. Because if we allocated vaccines properly, life could return to normal much faster. Much faster. And because it's all centrally planned, because it's all government-oriented. I mean, if you think about what's the name of this operation that Trump did, Operation, I'll get to it. One second. Yes, Operation Warp Speed. If you think about us, Operation Warp Speed, where they distributed billions and billions of dollars to drug makers buying these drugs in advance. The only good part of Operations Warp Speed, which is really good, right? Which is really good that the Trump administration did, is they sped up FDA authorization. But by buying all the drug in advance, they're the only ones buying the drug. And again, the laws say they're the only ones who can buy the drug. Operation Warp Speed. So it's bad enough that we are now going to be stuck in 6 months of ineffective, horrific distribution of a vaccine. It's bad enough that I, who would be willing to pay a lot of money to be vaccinated, cannot be vaccinated until some government bureaucrat, some government official decides that my random numbers come up and I can be vaccinated. I'm not in the age group. I don't have any pre-existing conditions. I'm not suffering enough. I don't have enough need. And therefore, I'm not going to get vaccinated early. So I have to wait. I can't travel. I can't do all these things. I have to wait until the summer when the vaccines are available to all of us. And yet, so that's bad enough. That's bad enough. I mean, if you don't believe, I'm just going to comment on something. If you don't believe that COVID exists, you really don't know what you're talking about. I mean, just talk to doctors who are actually treating patients who have it. Just talk to people who work in emergency rooms. Talk to people who work in hospitals. Talk to people who actually experience what this virus does to people. And look at the science. Look at the fact that even though some people claim there's no such thing as COVID, and yet we have the genome of the COVID vaccine. We have its genetic makeup mapped out perfectly. And indeed, we had that genetic makeup, and this brings me to we had that genetic. It's not an appeal to authority. It's an appeal to people with experience. It's an appeal to people who actually know what they're talking about versus your completely arbitrary statement, which has no basis in reality or fact. To say, go and talk to doctors who are actually experiencing this firsthand is not an appeal to authority. I mean, you guys read something on some conspiracy website and you think you're experts on this topic. It's just stunning to me, the ignorance that has been and the inability to think that is being revealed by this virus. That is the real virus in our culture, is the virus of inability to think. Hospitals are empty. Hospitals are empty, guys. Just go visit an ICU down here in Orange County, which is relatively, I mean, okay, I'm ignoring him now. All right, so it turns out that when a particular Chinese doctor in January understood what corona was, how contagious it was, and how dangerous it was, that a brave Chinese doctor actually put out the DNA of the coronavirus up. He basically distributed the exact sequence of the DNA of the coronavirus. This is in early January. Stunningly, within 2 days after the genetic sequence of the coronavirus was made public. By the way, this doctor has disappeared since, right? 2 days after the genetic sequence had been put out in public, Moderna had a vaccine. So on January 13th, before there had ever been a case diagnosed in the United States, Moderna already had a design for a vaccine, mRNA 1273. The Moderna vaccine design took 1 weekend. It was completed before China had even acknowledged that the disease was transmitted from human to human. By the time the first American death was announced in February, the vaccine had already been manufactured and shipped to the National Institute of Health for phase 1 clinical trials. So think about this. We now have, I don't know, you can argue about how many people have died, but officially 250 plus thousand people have died. We've shut down the economy, suffered short but deepest recession ever. Millions of people are out of work. Millions of businesses are probably shuttered for good. Hundreds of thousands of restaurants will never open. It's still ravaging our population. It's still going on. And yet, a vaccine was available in February. Now, there's a really good article on this if you're interested in digging the details. It's actually New York Magazine, not somewhere you'd expect something like this. New York Magazine, a piece written by David Wallace Wells just this week. It's titled, "We Had the Vaccine the Whole Time." So while people were dying, while in New York City, emergency rooms were packed, doctors and nurses were frantic. Just talk to those doctors and nurses and ask them if the hospitals were empty. There was a vaccine. The vaccine was undergoing FDA-required trials, randomized clinical trials, to prove that it's safe and efficacious. Trials that took 9 months, 10 months. In the meantime, people are dying. And we're playing at trials. Now, what would have happened in a free market? In a free market, a drug company could sell a vaccine on January 14. And you could buy it. And neither one of you would go to jail. In a free market, the vaccine would carry a label that said, this vaccine is untested. It has not been proven safe or effective in clinical trials. And you would sign away their liability, and you would accept the risk. Once you take it, you're now enrolled in a massive trial, because everybody who takes it would be monitored, and you would have this massive trial. If there were side effects, they would be, the drug company, as part of giving you the drug, would want to monitor you. They would get information. And while this trial, this massive trial, because a lot of people would take it, particularly after New York, what we saw in New York and in Italy, people would be taking this. The drug company would be improving the vaccine because they'd have all this information. They wouldn't be running these, and maybe on the side, they'd also be running a randomized trial, because some of the private rating agencies, the equivalent of an FDA, the private FDAs, would require that in order to get their certification. In the meantime, they would sell it off certificate. All that real-world testing would provide a lot more data. Their data would be applied. By the way, one of the things I didn't say about the vaccination before, the 90-year-old who got this vaccine, it's fascinating, right, for a couple of reasons. One, 90-year-olds were not in the test group. That is, the vaccine has not been tested on 90-year-olds. Indeed, very few old people were in the test groups. And yet, they're the people getting it first. Some of these 90-year-olds are going to die from the side effects because their system is so vulnerable. Their body is so weak. They could die from the side effects. The last people you want to give this to are older adults. But anyway, that's aside. Now, the drug company could release the vaccine. We could all choose to take it. We could all choose to take it. And we could all take the risk or not. And we always have the option of not taking the vaccine, of staying home, of locking ourselves away, or taking the risk of getting COVID, which I think a lot of young people probably would. But imagine a world in which we had that option. Imagine a world where we could choose whether we take the vaccine, how much risk we take, what to do once a virus hits. I mean, if a drug company sold something they knew was unsafe and ineffective, they would lose billions of dollars. They would be sued and they would be completely destroyed. Completely destroyed. Oops. What am I doing? If you look at these trials that Moderna and Pfizer and other companies have put out, the side effects will be minimal. There are side effects, but they're relatively small. You could have saved millions of people's lives across the world. And yes, there would have been a risk that one of these vaccines was bad and somebody got really sick and some people died. But they're dying anyway. And more people are dying right now. Many, many more people than would die from a bad vaccine. The idea that we need to be safe in front of risk of disease, safe in front of, before the risk of death, safe from what exactly? From evil drug companies pumping us full of either a useless drug or a drug that killed us? Really? That's how drug companies would make money? Is by killing us? Or by giving us something ineffective? But this is again altruism. Altruism leads us to distrust business, to distrust science, to distrust anybody who's doing the work. Altruism says that altruism says that businessmen, profit seekers, are going to lie, cheat, steal. They're going to do really, really bad things. So imagine if we'd been using the vaccines since they were developed. Again, no recession, no lockdowns, no shutdowns of our lives, and no 250,000 bodies just in the United States. Now, the FDA approved these vaccines super fast, but way too slow, way too slow. The FDA is the federal death agency because it has on its hands the deaths of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people. Because it didn't allow, that's the kind of world we live in, allow us individuals to take risks that we choose to take in order to get a vaccine on our timetable. And maybe our doctors would have advised against it, who knows? But that's our decision, not the government's, not the central planners. So the benefits of FDA protection are the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. That's the benefits. So the costs of FDA protection are unbelievable. We never talk about the costs. Nobody is interested in the costs. And I'm not even talking about all the other diseases that the FDA is involved regularly in having people killed by not letting people take drugs. And of course, I'm not even talking about the other alternative that has existed for months, which is home testing. Cheap, quick, fast, easy. Home testing, which the FDA has still not approved. Not the kind of home testing that would make a difference. The FDA stood in the way of every significant development here. And I'm not blaming the FDA, it's the whole system. The whole system is geared towards preventing us from making choices for ourselves and from benefiting from the best advancements in healthcare. And you should be outraged. We should all be outraged. I mean, literally, I didn't know this, that the vaccine was ready. The vaccine was ready, at least mapped out, not in production, but had been developed within 2 days of the release of the genetic code. it just stupefies. And again, we're the free market advocates. Where are all those free market economists? Where are all the believers in the freedom of the individual? Where are all the capitalists who should use this as an opportunity to demand these laws be changed? That the FDA's mandate, even if you want an FDA, if you need an FDA, you don't. And if FDA by definition violates individual rights. But the FDA mandate could be left just to make sure that companies are not selling drugs, committing fraud. It could be an agency that just is involved in making sure it's not committing fraud. Aspect of the policing. Where's the outrage by the free market world? Instead of advocating for conspiracy theories around COVID and around elections and around all the other BS, where is all the outrage and where is all the advocacy for true liberty, for true freedom? Let people decide. And if you think Corona is doesn't exist, then fine. In a free world, it doesn't matter. You suffer the consequences of your own beliefs. By the way, Milton Friedman, Milton Friedman would be horrified by you using his name to advocate this nonsense. Horrified. But so be it. All right. Not a lot of Super Chat questions, so now's your opportunity. Ask about anything, vaccines, Corona, anything you want. Just put a dollar amount next to it, and I will get to it. We've got a few questions here I will cover, but let me see something. Yeah, I don't think any of them were $20 questions, so I'll just do them in the order received. But don't forget to like the show before you leave. Right? We've got many more people watching the show that have pressed the like button, so please press the like button. This is one of those shows that I hope you will consider really sharing, because this is the kind of issue where we should be at the forefront, and when you should be brave enough to let the people in your universe know where you stand. This is the kind of issue where we can make the free market case on a relevant issue right now. It's not political. There's nobody in the political space. Nobody in the political space. Right? Nobody in the political space who is advocating for these ideas, not left, no right. So it's not TDS or anything like that. So it's time to advocate for your ideas. It's time to advocate on particular issues. And it's time to show the world how a free market would handle all of this. In a free market, there would have never been a pandemic. In a free market, there would have never been a recession. And there would never have been a pandemic because we'd be vaccinated for it. Or enough people would have taken the vaccine that it would have never spread the way it did. Because the science we have today is stunning. Is amazing. But we don't get a benefit from it. Because government monopolizes it. Because government controls it. All right. So don't forget to like the show. It should be over 100 right now. Don't forget to use Super Chat to support the show. You can ask questions. You can just give a contribution. That would be great to get your support through Super Chat, value for value. Don't forget to share the show. And of course, the best way to support the show is through monthly support. You can do that on Subscribestar, Patreon, YaronBrookShow.com/support, or locals. But right now, it'd be great to get some additional Super Chat questions, particularly ones that have high dollar amount associated with them, because A, those will get priority in terms of when I answer them, and B, we don't want today's show to be one of the lowest revenue generating shows ever when the content was so friggin' good. All right. Just wanted to say your last two shows were excellent, very enlightening, and a pleasure to watch. Thank you. I didn't notice it wasn't a question, but thank you. Do you think insurance companies in a free market would be incentivized to be progressive in discovering and stockpiling vaccines and cures? Yes. I mean, think of the cost, take government out of the equation completely. Think of the cost of sending somebody to a hospital and having to pay as an insurance company, for that person to be in hospital. And think of the cost of those kind of things. Now, I don't know if you can stockpile vaccines. You probably can't because vaccine has to be specifically targeted. But the insurance companies would plan in advance. They would add capacity. They would pay for extra capacity at hospitals so that hospitals could handle this, and hospitals would invest in extra capacity. So it would be between insurance companies, and they would definitely be willing to buy vaccines in advance. They'd be doing all kinds of proactive things in order to deal with events like this in advance, so that they wouldn't have to. It wouldn't have to cost them as much as it does. But it is, you can't evaluate insurance companies based on their behavior today. There's no competition, there's no freedom, they're heavily regulated, the government owns so much of the healthcare system, there's so much government involvement in healthcare that you can't judge the system as it behaves today, hospitals, doctors, pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, and insurance companies, based on what they're doing today, how they would behave in a free market. A free market is a completely different world, completely different world. Jonathan Honing, I assume, on Nikos, with Nikos, made a distinction between the Atlas Society and TOS, seeing TOS as a legit, separate, objectivist group. Do you share that view? Bitter would be on with Centre UK. Is a quiet rapprochement underway? I'm not going to answer this question. I mean, what does legit mean? How do you define all this? I don't comment on Craig Biddle and TOS. I have no interest in doing so. Rapprochement in a sense of, will I publish in TOS, support TOS, promote TOS, do any of that? The answer is no, I will not. But I have no interest in commenting. I do think there is a difference between TOS and the Atlas Society. I'm far more, I think Atlas Society commits fraud. I'm not willing to say that about TOS. But I have no interest and no motivation to comment on this kind of stuff. It's just not interesting to me, and I don't think it should be interesting to you. You make a decision between the level of support you're willing to give each one of these different groups, and based on your understanding of objectivism and your values and your understanding of the disputes and so on. Why would I? ARI is where my focus is. ARI is doing great work. ARI is, really, you'll see in the months and years to come, doing fantastic work, blowing it out of the water in every respect. I'm not interested in what other people are doing and what other people claim to be doing and what other people claim I think they're doing. None of that is interesting. I'm training to become a teacher. I want to teach objectivism in a fun way without getting canceled. Advice on bringing Rand's message to third graders. The only message you can bring of Rand's to third graders is things like independence. And you don't teach independence. You encourage independence. You promote independence, right? You set up a classroom in a way that encourages independence, like Montessori does. You don't give them a lecture about the virtue of independence. You model it. You promote that kind of behavior. You want to get third graders thinking in a particular way. You want to get them using their reason in a particular way. And that's how you teach. That's how you engage with your students. You don't teach philosophy to a third grader. Third graders can't abstract at that level. They can't comprehend the ideas at that level. You teach the truth, and you teach what you teach in a methodology that conveys the appropriate methodology by which they should learn. Facts, evidence, reality orientation. But the idea, so you have to set up that there's no fun way of teaching philosophy. Philosophy needs to be studied. It's deep, it's intense, it's difficult. But you're not teaching kids philosophy. You're teaching them knowledge, and you're teaching them how to use their mind. That's all you do as a teacher. Particular content in particular subject matter, and how to use their mind, and how the content is integrated. So you use the philosophy in how you develop your curriculum. You use the philosophy in how you teach and how you model thinking skills and what kind of thinking skills you expect of the student. But you don't have philosophy courses to third graders. And Leonard Peikoff has a wonderful course on education, which I highly recommend. You can get that. I'm pretty sure it's on the Ayn Rand YouTube channel. I would look into that and other lectures and courses on education that are available through the Ayn Rand Institute. The reason this idea hasn't come up more is because the right has given up on real economic ideas and bought into the own left culture war. I think that's right. I think basically there is no right of economic freedom. There is nobody on the right advocating for, talking about, writing about, speaking about economic freedom. Right? So it's true that, and I've said this over and over and over again the last 5 years, that the right has given up completely on free markets, on economic freedom, on the principles of capitalism, and basically engage with the left where the left wants to engage, and abandon, in the name of collectivism, statism, the field. And therefore there's nobody out there except for a few people like John Cochrane who are talking about real economic liberty and real economic freedom. Right? Valcaron writes, I just find this comment funny. Sorry, Valcaron, but I do. Even though it's not a super chat, I'll read it. Even Yaron Brook probably isn't a perfect objectivist. Okay, whatever. Doesn't he speculate in managed funds despite the fact that evidence strongly points to index funds having the best returns? I'm curious, Valcaron, when you make a statement like that, because this is a good lesson in objectivity. A few things. One is, how well do you understand the studies that point to index funds having the best returns? How well do you understand what managed funds are? How well do you understand what I actually do with managed funds? How well do you know the returns my hedge fund has generated over the years? How well do you know whether return is the best and only measure of investing performance? Is it? How do you take into account risk, for example? Before you make a statement like that, and this is to everybody, do you have objective knowledge about any one section of the sentence? The answer is no. From the sentence, I'm gleaning that. You certainly don't know anything about what I do in the markets, and yet you're making this comment. But what does evidence strongly point to index funds having best returns relative to what? On a risk-return basis over how many periods of time? Does that hold for every single fund or an average? Are there funds that systematically over time have beaten an index fund? Yes. Yes, I wish I had money in Renaissance, in the hedge fund Renaissance. Oh my God, have they beaten index funds by a huge margin. How do markets get efficient? How do index funds make money? What is the process? What is the process by which markets become efficient and therefore it's hard to find returns? All of those are real questions. And yet, you make a claim about me. That's fine. I don't know what a perfect objectivist means, and maybe I'm not, and I'm sure you can say I make mistakes. There's no question I make mistakes. But when you say something like this, do you know what you're talking about? Funds that beat the market eventually return to mean always. Really? Is Renaissance return to mean? I mean, has Warren Buffett returned to mean? Always? You know this? You studied the financial literature on this? I doubt it. So before you make statements like this, check the objectivity of your statement. And check what you know and what you don't know. It's dangerous to talk about stuff you don't really know about, not thoroughly. Right? Maybe you've read 5 books, but the literature is made up of huge numbers of academic papers and books, and they're actually real-world examples. They're people who trade. And it's not about chiding me. It's about saying something that has objectivity. I don't care if somebody's 100% objective or not 100% objective. That's not the point. The point is, you need to be objective in what you say and what you write. All right, how do you respond when people say we can't allow individual risk assessment because some will make bad choices that injure others? Well, then they should bear the consequences of injuring others. If some people's bad choices injure others, then they should bear the consequence. People go out driving and they're bad drivers and they get into accidents and they hurt other people. I mean, there are ways in which we should hold people accountable, whether it's through liability law or if they're criminally negligent through criminal law. There's such a thing as being criminally negligent. So, we have legal and financial and market mechanisms. For example, irresponsible people pay higher insurance premiums than responsible people. There are all kinds of ways to both incentivize the proper behavior and penalize the improper behavior. Where in the Caribbean would you recommend a 20-something to live? I don't know. I mean, I live in Puerto Rico, as you know, but I'm not sure that's where I would recommend for a 20-something to live. It depends on what you do. It depends on what you like. It depends on your career. It depends on how much taxes you pay right now. It depends on a lot of different things. The choice I made to live in Puerto Rico should not be the choice all of you make. Each one of us has to make a choice based on your values and based on your needs, in terms of your life at that point in time. I'm not sure it makes sense for a 20-something to live in the Caribbean. And a 20-something needs to build up his career, needs to be engaged in pursuing a career, and that's probably better done in a city or in a bigger market than the Caribbeans. You can teach third graders these ideas through stories like the red hand, the emperor's new clothes. Yeah, I mean, you can certainly tell stories that have an embedded morality in it. What you cannot do is teach philosophy. You can use stories to convey moral ideals and moral ideas. But beware of giving lectures on philosophy and beware of trying to draw out the lessons at too high of an abstract level. So even the red hand and others, you can draw out the lessons at a concrete level, but beware of going too abstract. How did I miss Jax's question? I don't know. I didn't copy it. What are your thoughts on the latest response from the Supreme Court to the latest Texas lawsuit? I actually talked about that yesterday on the show. I mean, I think that the response was what I expected. It's what I said the show before that would be the response. It was basically 7-2 should we take the case, with Alito and Thomas basically saying we should take the case because we should take every case where one state is suing another state. I don't have an opinion about that, but it was unanimous on the merits. That is, that both Thomas and Alito said, yes, but even if we'd taken the case, we would have not agreed to this, to stopping the Electoral College from voting. We would not agree to the injunction, to the temporary injunction on continuation. So there was no enough merit, even if to take the case, to do what the plaintiffs asked to do. So Trump would have lost the case even if they'd gone to court, at least on the temporary injunction, and by unanimous. Every conservative judge would have voted against it, and it's quite. It's exactly what I predicted. I said it would be unanimous. I said maybe it would be 7-2 because I'd already read that Alito and Thomas believe that when states sue other states, the Supreme Court should always take the case. But it wouldn't have mattered one way or the other. This is the Supreme Court is a court of law, and therefore it requires evidence and it requires standards of law. And by every standard, legal standard, and by the standards of evidence, no systemic fraud that would cause overturning this election was committed. And I think every single judge, one of the things that happened over the weekend is a judge in Wisconsin wrote another scathing thing about on the Trump campaign. And he is, again, a Republican Trump appointee to the federal appellate court. And he was scathing. So I don't know when people are going to allow this to sink in and to accept the fact that it seems that no judge in this country, believes that there is enough here to advance within the legal system and to have any kind of remedy that would change the outcome of this election, including super conservative judges in appellate courts and in the Supreme Court. Now that the vaccine is out, will you talk with Dr. Adulja again? His insights have been useful through this COVID-19. Yes, I've been meaning to talk to Amesh. I know he's been super busy, and I know other people have interviewed him like the Institute, and I will talk to him again. Try to talk to him again soon. It depends on his schedule. I think with the vaccine out, one of the reasons I haven't talked to him is because everything he said in February or March has come to be. Everything he's been warning against has happened. People don't pay attention. People don't seem to care. We just be repeating ourselves. Everything I said back in February, March, April, May has turned out to be true. It doesn't seem to have affected anything. So, the people who believe in the COVID conspiracy theory continue to believe in the COVID conspiracy theory. The people who believe that if they step out of their house, they're going to drop dead because of COVID believe that. You've got panic on hysteria, irrationality on both sides, and then you've got a bunch of people who believe the government should handle this and the government should get involved and the government should do everything. So the remedy for this was well known way back when, and it's been ignored throughout this crisis. And now that we know about the vaccine, it's even worse. What is your view on the banality of evil? I don't think of it as banality. I think Ayn Rand thought of it as the impotence of evil. And this idea that evil is... There's a lot of bad premises, I think, in the banality of evil. You know what? I'm going to save this question. Because let me think about it. And there's a lot to say about that issue. And let me put it aside as something I'll get to. Because there's something very wrong in viewing evil that way. Even though it's true that people can be easily seduced by, and ordinary people seem to be swept up by evil under certain circumstances. But I much prefer Rand's conception of evil as impotent, because and that it is the good that gives evil power. It is the good compromising with evil. It's the good cooperating with evil. So it's the element of rationality that is in evil service that gives evil power. Because evil is the irrational. Evil is the lack of knowledge, lack of reason, lack of thinking, lack of ability, lack of production, lack of everything. That's evil. It's the evasion of all that is. The only way evil can produce is for some to be productive. So an evil person who is also productive, the evil within him can only survive because of the good within him. An evil country like Nazism. The Nazis could only survive because there were people in Germany willing to work for them who deployed the good, deployed reason, rationality, production. So it's in every case, it's the good compromising, the good working for, the good excusing, the good making possible. And this idea that they just followed orders. Everybody has free will. They didn't just follow orders. They knew what they were doing. Yes, they followed orders, but you can resist orders. Evil requires you to cooperate. Imagine if all those people who would supposedly just followed orders, if all of them had resisted, if all of them had said no, if all of them had walked away. Couldn't have shot everybody. So evil significance is only in its ability to seduce the good to do its bidding. And that's what happens in every evil regime, but every interaction between evil people and good people. Evil can only gain power because good people support it. This is why sanction of evil is such a big issue in objectivism, why you shouldn't sanction evil, you shouldn't sanction destructive people, you shouldn't sanction people who hurt the good. It's your sanction that gives them credibility, it's your sanction that gives them power, it's your sanction that gives them strength and meaning. They themselves can't do anything. They themselves cannot hurt the good. It's only by other good people helping them can they hurt the good. All right. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. Don't forget to like the show before you leave. And don't forget to support the Yaron Brook Show. I depend on your support. The funds that I receive from doing these shows make these shows possible, both technically, but also in terms of me being able to devote the kind of time that I have to devote to doing these shows. And to do that the best way, and I really appreciate getting new contributors. I know we've got a lot of new subscribers. It would be great to see you trade by becoming a supporter, and you can do that on yaronbrookshow.com/support, or on Patreon, or on Subscribestar. Those of you already supporters, those of you who can, I would really appreciate you bumping up your support a little bit. I'm still reaching for a particular target in terms of monthly income that'll make this kind of doing all this pain-free. Noel asks, if this virus was caused by an interaction with wildlife, are the people behind the Great Reset saying anything about clamping down on that activity? Or are they just focused on sneaking in their socialist policies? They're just focused on sneaking in their statist policies. They're not even socialist. As I said before, they're more fascist than anything. They're using this as an excuse. They're using this as a never let a crisis go to waste. They're using this as people are weak right now. They're susceptible. They're easy to convince of the importance of government, the importance of big government, the importance of government action. And therefore, this is an opportunity for us to do big things. They don't care about the virus. They don't care where it came from. They don't care about how many people have died or not died. What they care about is that the living, the survivors, the resolve against the state is weakened because in an emergency, people want the state to help them. And that's what they're counting on. And that's just a way for them. And it's not even sneak. They're not sneaky at all. They're completely upfront. They're telling you exactly what they want to do. They're writing it down. Major publications are publishing it. The idea that this is a conspiracy is ridiculous. There's no conspiracy here. Conspiracies don't happen in the open. Conspiracies are not written about and on they're not whole websites devoted by the people advocating for this. This is an out and out, program. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks you. And don't forget, if you're not a subscriber, subscribe to the show and see you probably tomorrow. I'm not doing a show on Tuesday, so probably tomorrow. Tomorrow evening, probably, 7 or 8 p.m. Eastern time. See you tomorrow.